You're listening to Workforce Innovation News, powered by LWIA 23. Get ready to hear about all things workforce development and workforce innovation. And now, on to the episode.
Hello, and welcome to WIN, Workforce Innovation News. I am Jamie Korda Hijawi, the director for LWIA 23. Today, I have the wonderful Amber Niebrugge with me, and she's going to join us today to talk a little bit about trauma-informed care in the workforce. Before we get started, Amber, would you like to give a brief introduction of yourself, maybe a little bit of your background, and let us know what you do at Lakeland College?
Yeah, so currently I am the counselor for accommodations and mental health initiatives at Lakeland College. I started in this role in August of this year, but before that I was the director of the TRIO Student Support Services program that we have on campus. So my role now is to support students that have disabilities to help make sure that they get the accommodations that they need to be successful in college. And then also starting the work on the mental health initiatives for our students. So I do meet with students for like short-term counseling. If they're on campus and, stressed about something or need to talk about something, they can come in and meet with me. I'm also referring them out to community agencies for like longer term counseling. And then we offer BetterMind, which is an online counseling platform for our students. And so I'm also the person in charge of that. So like referring students to it, making sure that they're getting the support that they need through that app as well. I went to Eastern, so I have a master's degree in clinical counseling. I worked a couple of years in community mental health before I started working at Lakeland.
So see, all that stuff you said is why I knew you would be a great fit for this topic. My team had kind of thrown that topic out a while ago as something we wanted to explore. I know the perfect person. I just got to ask Amber and see if she'll do it.
Thank you.
I know in TRIO you worked a lot with students, and now you're still in the student aspect of it, but I'm going to talk to you about workplace. So I think a lot of the same principles apply, just thinking about it from a slightly different perspective. But I mean, basically trauma-informed care, it's something that has been on my radar for a while and I've been really interested in, but I have not done any really deep dives into understanding it fully. But I feel like it's becoming more and more important recently. So just the little bit of readings I've done, over 50% of women in America and over 60% of men have self-reported that they've experienced at least one traumatic event in their lifetime. That's most of us. So just in knowing that trauma can be anything from military combat to car accidents to abuse at the hands of a parent or a partner, I think that really affects people not only in the short term, the immediate reactions, but long term, it really affects how they handle certain situations, stressful situations, how quickly they get burnt out maybe in the workforce and how that burnout looks for them. And just my own experience with not only trauma, but even more simple things like just arguing with my kids before work. I know I get to work and then I'm not focused. So if there's a serious traumatic incident and then you have to go to work and you're not focused, you're withdrawn, you're agitated, how does that look to employers and how is that going to affect that person's employment? So as all these thoughts keep tumbling around in my head and I'm connecting dots slowly, I really wanted to explore it a little bit more and see if you had some insights for me. So for our listeners, and maybe for me too, can you explain a little bit more about what trauma-informed care is and what it might look like in the workforce?
Yeah, and to go off of something that you talked about too, all of the different things that may cause trauma, when you also think about the COVID-19 pandemic and everything that comes along with that, I have wondered how those statistics have changed. So how many of us have experienced trauma because of the pandemic? There were so many things that happened, whether it was the stress of your family and wondering if they were safe or worrying about your own health, deaths, loss of life, just the constant stress of maybe your kids are not, you have kids and they're at home instead of at school. And there was so much that went into that. And it's like, it was just a constant stress that really hasn't stopped yet. So I have wondered how those statistics would change as we kind of get further into this and learn more about it. And with trauma in the workplace, something that I thought was interesting when you had originally invited me to this podcast, I wanted to look some more into it because we learned about trauma in grad school. We hear about trauma a lot, but what does it mean as far as, trauma-informed care in the workplace? And I think the good news is that a lot of it can be really straightforward. It's just making sure that we're like opening up communication and really taking care of one another. To relate it back to the work that I do now, something that I told students when I was in TRIO, and I found myself still telling students this, is that life continues to happen outside of what you're doing in school. So even though you are expected to be here, we can't deny that the things that are going on are going to impact what you're doing in school. And it's the same for the workplace. I mean, it's just as you said, even the fights, arguments with your kids, trying to get them ready for school. And then you come in and you're not here, you're just not fully there. So it is something that can be simple, but then it's also evolving and there's a lot more that's going into it. So they're learning more about ways that they can approach mental health in the workplace to really support employees. So to go along with that, and I made some notes here to kind of keep myself on track too. I think the basic starting point is just really opening up those conversations with your employees, whether that's conversations about mental health, conversations about, how the employee is doing and giving them a little bit more control in what they're doing in the workforce. And that can look different for every job, but just helping those people who have experienced trauma come into work and feel like they have some sense of control while they're here. Because that's really what they need, is that sense of control and empowerment in what's going on in their lives. So that could be like one-on-one conversations, or that can also be like sending out, continuously kind of sending out surveys to assess how things are going within the organization. And then taking what you get from those surveys and then trying to figure out what you can do with it to improve the way that employees feel in the workplace or improve that morale. So that's kind of a simple step that we can all take, but it's going to be also important for like supervisors and managers and HR to kind of get the understanding of like how trauma impacts the employees whenever they're at work, so that you can understand how to support them in those one-on-one conversations. And it gets a little more complicated there, like how do you train them and what kind of information do you provide? And there are resources that are emerging as far as through the CDC has some good information. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which is a really big title, they have some good resources too, as well as SHRM, which is the Society for Human Resources Management. So we are starting to get some information on how to really help the workforce, but it's all in the early stages. And I have heard more about it because of the pandemic. Like how do you support employees as they are returning to work? And how do you give them that sense of empowerment, that control? Because we've all lost so much control in our lives. So how do you help them come back to work and feel a sense of control about that return to work and about what they're doing while they're here?
That was very well put. I had been trying to think of different ways that I would like to implement trauma-informed care just with my small team here at Lakeland with LWIA 23. And I wasn't really coming up with a whole lot other than just talk to them. But it sounds like that's exactly what I should be doing, is opening up communication lines. And I like the idea of empowerment. That's just kind of a management technique I use anyway. But I can definitely see someone who's been through a lot of trauma, and even someone just in the current atmosphere that we're all in right now, like you said, we've all lost control of some sort. Just to have that power back does really elevate confidence and your sense of self. So that rang a bell with me. I'm going to continue on that path of using empowerment to help my team anyway. But I got to thinking as you were talking with a bigger team. If you think about it on a Lakeland level, maybe how are employers supposed to know that their employees are struggling with trauma or have had trauma, and some of the things that they're seeing, that withdrawal, that agitation, the lack of focus, those are things that really came up in my business studies as that's a withdrawn employee, they're unmotivated, do something about it. But how do we know that we should do something trauma informed? Should all, give me a second, should all methods of working on improving motivation for employees, should it just all be trauma informed and kind of cover the whole spectrum? Or what are your thoughts on that?
To me, that kind of goes back to the statistics that we talked about, because it's going to be more than likely the majority of the employees that you have are going to have some type of trauma. And even if it's not trauma, some sort of stress in their life. We don't know what's going on outside of work. And so, yeah, I would say that approach, just as an organization, just make it a part of what you're already trying to do. Just like with healthcare. I mean, we have those conversations about wellness. We have those conversations about, the regular doctor's appointments. And here at Lakeland, we do like the annual screenings. Because we know that that's good for everyone. And so the same can be thought of when it comes to trauma-informed care and taking care of employees. And you are right, too. I was just thinking that so much with mental health care, we think that it's really just for the trained professionals. Like, I can't do that. But it really comes down to just treating one another like we're humans and knowing that we all have things going on. So starting the conversations as a supervisor with your staff, and then using the information that you have learned to kind of take that up the ladder to eventually get to, other supervisors, HR, so that they all are aware of kind of what employees are facing and what's happening on the ground level. And then organizations have to be open to receiving that feedback too.
That's a good point, because we can take it up the ladder, as you said. We can start the conversation, but leadership really has to embrace it. It's one thing, leadership on the ground level, but leadership even at the top level really needs to embrace it for it to be an organizational change.
Yes, yeah. But we can still support one another. And that's the good part about what you're doing. And hopefully, having these conversations, we'll see it more, is that as long as we're supporting the employees, hopefully that change can happen. But even if it doesn't, the employees will appreciate that one-on-one contact that they're getting with you.
Definitely. So we're seeing that there's benefits to the employees, that they're able to stay in their job, have a little less stress, have that empowerment, feel a little bit better about themselves. But what do you see the benefits being for the employers by implementing some of these changes and being more trauma informed in their practices and policies?
So a lot of it goes back to kind of what we talked about with healthcare. Trauma and toxic stress can impact health insurance costs, sick leave, missed work days, workplace safety. So all of those things that they're already thinking about, it's really no different than healthcare, just because it impacts, again, all of their life. And all of the work that they're doing. But stress can cause neurological changes, which can impact like high blood pressure, sleeplessness, depression, colitis, ulcers, cancer. So, stress does a lot of things to our body, which then in turn causes a lot of things to happen in our lives, causes us to need that healthcare, missed work and things like that. So that, looking from the business perspective, if you want to make sure that you're getting all that you can out of your employees and taking care of them, we have to think about their mental health just like we do their physical health.
Like a domino effect.
Yeah.
Stress really, I expected you to list a couple things and then you listed a few more. That list could still go on even longer. It really does impact a lot of different aspects of our lives. And And employers, I know we'd like to think that everyone's about the people, but in all reality, there's still a lot of employers out there who are looking at the numbers. So
Mhm.
if that's something that you want a change in your organization, you can pull out that data, show the numbers. They can save money here and here and here. This affects the bottom line positively. Let's implement it.
Yeah, because there's always the people that have to think of that side of it too. You know, we don't come from that background where that's the first thing that comes to mind, but somebody has to do it.
Exactly. Well, what?
I was going to say that something else that I had read was the question of offering training for employees. So something else that comes up with it is kind of like luckily here at Lakeland, we do several staff development opportunities, and I know other companies do too, but incorporating into those mental health conversations. So helping employees to make that connection with what trauma is, the impact that it can have or may not have. So trauma can happen to one person and they may have a trauma response, but the other person may have the supports in their life where it doesn't cause any impact on their life. So helping them to see what trauma is, the impact that it can have, but then also the control that we can have in it. So what type of things that can you do to help support yourself to gain back that control, to help make sure that this isn't negatively impacting your life and the work that you do. So incorporating those training opportunities as well, so that employees are getting even more exposure beyond, we offer an employee assistance program, here it is, but helping them feel more comfortable with those conversations and learning more about it.
That's a really good point. And I think training is incredibly important. And even like I just said, as we're talking, I'm trying to think how I can implement some changes or how I can do better. But to have a very designated training opportunity would be helpful to people like me. So I can imagine there's probably a bunch of people like me out there who are just trying to figure things out as they go sometimes and want to do good, but don't necessarily have all the tools or information that they need to do well. So training opportunities, and that's very WIOA. We do some training. So I like that even better. So yeah, as you talk, my brain really just starts like firing off all these pistons or sparks or something, because you say some really good things, but then I jump and my brain connects it with something else. So you're talking about trauma, and the same trauma can happen to two different people, but their responses are very different based on support systems or whatnot. How related is just grit and resiliency in people to their trauma response? I know I'm a little off topic here, but now I'm interested and I got to have this answer because I'm curious. What are your thoughts on just natural inborn grit or resiliency and trauma? Which one comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do you become resilient because of trauma, or are you resilient and thus trauma affects you differently?
I would say that it happens both ways. I don't know for sure, but that's kind of what I think, is that sometimes trauma can teach us something, or maybe you already have, you get into a car accident. And so for somebody that doesn't have a lot of family support, who doesn't have the resources that they need to kind of recover from that could be really impactful, and it could cause fear in driving and coming to work and, functioning. But then other people, I remember when I got in my first car accident when I was 16, and my parents were there and they were supportive and they made me get back in that car and do it again. And so, it was that, I don't know that it was resilience as much as like support system there to guide me and help to kind of push me where I need to go. So there, and I know it's a really complicated, what's the word that I'm looking for? Like I don't think that there's any real answer on why it truly impacts one person and doesn't another. One thing that I thought of when I was looking for information on this too is whenever we learned about adverse childhood events, whenever I was in grad school, they had us take the ACEs survey. And the result that I got back, when I got back the number of, traumatic experience I had experienced in my life, is kind of like, oh, my gosh, like how has this impacted me and what has this done to my life? And it took me a while to process that, okay, just because you experience trauma doesn't mean that you had a response to it. And so it took me a while to kind of come to that acceptance, because I had this fear of like, wow, there must be a lot of things going on that I haven't dealt with. And that's not always the case.
I took that ACEs test too. And yeah, I came out of it thinking, wow, I'm really messed up.
Yeah.
But I'm fairly well adjusted for being so messed up, I guess. No, not that trauma messes people up. It's that we respond differently. But that was my takeaway from it was, wow, maybe I should talk to someone.
Yeah, I was worried that there were things that I wasn't dealing with. I must have just tucked this away somewhere and not dealt with it.
Exactly. Yeah. It gets you thinking. And that's where I had zero clue about trauma-informed care or anything until I took that ACEs test. And then that's where I started getting more interested in it. And now coming into workforce and seeing, I guess what was really triggering our interest in doing a podcast on it was, like you've been talking about, the people in healthcare during COVID, that they've had to, not only have they experienced their own personal losses or personal traumas with COVID, but then they're in the trenches working with these, trying to take care of these people who are very, very sick. They're seeing death. They're seeing extreme sickness. They're seeing young people losing their lives early and worrying about burnout. This has come from a burnout conversation too. And what are your thoughts on how trauma or trauma-informed care and burnout, how do those align? Do you see those being related, or do you see them being two different things?
I see them as being related, just because if you're not taking care of yourself, if you go to your workplace and you don't feel like you're supported, you don't feel like you're being heard, you don't feel like your voice matters, it's going to be very easy to get burnt out. If you don't know about resources, if you don't know about ways that you can go and help gain some control of this, it's going to be very easy to just feel like, what's my motivation? What am I doing? How am I going to keep going? Or getting creative with my work if I'm not taking care of myself. So I do believe that they're really closely connected.
Definitely. I thought so too, but I'm going to trust you more because you have more education on it. I just make stuff up in my head.
Yeah. I think you know more than you give yourself credit for.
Maybe a little bit more. So we've explored what trauma-informed care is and some of how it impacts the workforce, and just that it all rolls downhill. What happens in one area of your life is not completely isolated. It's going to affect all areas. And we've talked about what employers can do to try to support. And that was the biggest thing, being a support. Lines of communication are open, and promoting mental health awareness and trauma-informed care in the workplace. We've talked about why it's important to both employees and employers. I think we've covered a lot of shallow ground here. I think we could deep dive into a lot of different things.
Yes.
Is there anything else that you think's important that you'd like to share about trauma-informed care in the workplace that we haven't already talked about?
I feel like we've covered it all. And I mentioned the resources. So there are a lot of resources out there if somebody wants to really do that deep dive and learn more. And I can share those with you too. I found a really good report that then had a bunch of additional references and resources that you could dig into. But what excites me the most about this is really just the kind of continued movement towards making mental health care and not making it something separate. That's what we're trying to do at Lakeland, and talking to our students is helping people to feel more comfortable, to have those conversations, to open up when they have a question or they need resources or they need support. And the workforce kind of missed out on that because we didn't have that type of approach when we were in school. So this is our opportunity to be trauma informed in the workforce, to kind of catch up those people that didn't have those conversations whenever they were in school.
You're exactly right. This is a great opportunity. It's come from a great tragedy, but good things do come from bad events. So let's latch onto this opportunity and let's spread some trauma-informed care throughout the workforce.
Yeah.
And it just kind of reminded me of a meme I saw the other day about self-care and how people don't really prioritize it. And someone said, think about it as system maintenance. It's part of your system maintenance, just like you would do to your computer or to a machine. You need to do that system maintenance to yourself, that self-care as well. So I think that's 100% true.
And it can be so easy as recognizing when something isn't feeling right and just taking a moment to take a few deep breaths to just recenter yourself. So it doesn't have to be going to a counselor. It doesn't have to take a lot of time, but just learning what works for you, recognizing when something doesn't feel right, and then helping yourself utilizing your coping skills.
You're exactly right. We're working on that with my 8-year-old. Let's take some
Yes.
deep breaths, breathe in the positive and out the negative. I'll let you know if that's effective for her.
Yeah,
I'm still working on that.
Trying it with my 8-year-old too. So,
Well, Amber, it has been wonderful. I could talk to you for hours on this, but let's go ahead and wrap it up. And hopefully our listeners will come away with some ideas of how they can advocate for trauma-informed policies at their workplace. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. Bye.
You've been listening to Workforce Innovation News powered by LWIA 23. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. To learn more about LWIA 23, visit lwa23.net.